Oh, it's me.
Hey, it's me now. Hello, guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Joel Moran Show. Now, I know why you guys are here. You guys are here to hear me talk about them Eagles, man. 3-game losing streak. 3 games to the Cowboys, to the 49ers, and now to the Drew Lock led Seahawks team because Geno Smith couldn't play. Oh, we're going to talk about them Eagles. I got my friend here with me, Mr. John
It's me.
Tortorelli. How you doing, John?
It's been a rough week, I'll be real with you, but I'm happy to be here and we got some great games, and I think this was a nice way to wrap up week 15.
And now I just want to let you guys know, for everybody watching right now, I am a little bit under the weather right now. I am a bit sick. That's why my voice sounds a little bit muddy. Before we get into the show, just want to remind you guys to download PrizePicks and use code PAS. It's very easy. Just go to the App Store, download PrizePicks, enter your info, sign up, and you can place entries and you can go more or less on player props, and you can get some winnings. So let's get into the first part of the show, John. The Seahawks beat the Eagles 20-17. I don't know about you. Once I heard Drew Lock was playing in this game, I didn't have much confidence. But then I said, there's something special about playing in Lumen Field. There's something special about Seattle. There's something to say about the Eagles being winless against Seattle in the last 10 years. It didn't matter if it was Geno. It didn't matter if it was Drew Lock. The Eagles may have had the lead, but Jalen Hurts' interception leads to Seahawks scores. And on that final drive, Jalen Hurts, another interception. Great play by the defender, but I mean, I don't know if it's just you. Jalen Hurts has seemed to regress to me. He is not playing like the same quarterback that he was last season. He is settling for deep shots down the field when in previous games, when you watch the film back, there are players open underneath. There's a reason A.J. Brown is frustrated. Jalen Hurts just got paid. And man, he's not living up to his contract. I'm looking at these Eagles and not the same team from last year. You lose Shane Steichen, you lose Jonathan Gannon. That defense is Swiss cheese. You can't trust them. And that offense is not the same, man. These Eagles, they're pretenders. They're not going back to the Super Bowl. And I'm actually hesitant to say that they'll reach the NFC Championship. I think they're in danger of losing to a team in the first round of the playoffs.
It's quite crazy to think that for a team that I think week one, week two, we view them as one of the most complete teams in football, but they come into this game, they lose Darius Slay on an arthroscopic knee procedure. This is a completely different team than last year. I think it's a subtle reminder of how difficult it is to sustain complete rosters. The Eagles secondary is a total 180 from last year. James Bradbury's regressed. Their safety play has been completely different. But then offensively, while they've still had the same exact offensive supporting cast, as you highlighted, with Jalen Hurts, there's a variety of factors. Number one, this game, he's playing with the flu. He's sick this week. He's not really able to prepare as fully. And you can tell in this game, he was just slower to react, especially on the road versus the Seahawks team. They're 6-7. This is their entire season right here. And this is a Seattle team that wins close games like this at home, as you alluded to, all the time. They get good pressure with the 4 or 5 man rush. And then the secondary stepped up today. Julian Love, 2 big interceptions, the second to seal the game. I felt like Seattle was in the perfect position to kind of have that upset alert. But I think the bigger takeaway for Philadelphia is just that offensively, they need to find that rhythm and something they can consistently count on, because there's not that short to intermediate attack that with their weapons, they're able to get going when nothing's working downfield. And that's what makes them a bit one-dimensional. And I think for every elite offense there is, you need to be able to win from all 3 phases, all 3 levels, I should say. And with Philadelphia, they kind of are a team that needs to knock you out of where on the ground. And if neither of those 2 things are working at a high level, then they're going to have a harder time offensively, unlike last year, I would say.
I think there's a lot to do and going on with the Eagles' lack of success just as a team. I want to hone in on the offensive side of the football because I feel as if coming into the season, John, I didn't feel like it was fair. I didn't think I got a fair shake. You know, I pointed out some of the things Jalen Hurts struggled with. I got labeled as a hater. I pointed out the things the Eagles were losing. People just said I'm overreacting. You know, they'll be fine. Jalen Hurts just had a great performance in the Super Bowl. Therefore, all my hesitations with him and propelling him to that elite tier quarterback should be just washed away. But John, I look at this team and what has been their identity for years now. When Jalen Hurts first started at quarterback with this team, what was their identity, John?
It's always been running the football.
It's always been running the football. And I think because Jalen Hurts is a mobile quarterback, he got too much credit for their ability to run the football. But that's besides the point. This year, I was not a big fan of DeAndre Swift. I talked about DeAndre Swift's weaknesses as a player. He had 2 games where he rushed over 100 yards. I was a hater. Against defensive lines that were having 3 defensive linemen on defense against this offensive line. I didn't really buy into those performances. DeAndre Swift has been a downgrade from Miles Sanders. I don't care about what Sanders is doing in Carolina. That's a terrible situation. He was better than the Eagles than DeAndre Swift. You cannot trust DeAndre Swift in crucial pass protecting downs. Therefore, he's not a 3-down back, and his vision is very spotty. A once dominant offensive line is really not able to run the football like they once were. And you look at Jalen Hurts. There are some quarterbacks that can survive losing great coordinators or great offensive coaches. You look at Josh Allen. Without Brian Dable, he was the same. Ken Dorsey, all of the Bills' offensive ranks were at the top of the league. I don't know if that's a credit to Ken Dorsey. That's just how great Josh Allen is. There are some quarterbacks that can still be great despite the coordinator they have. Jalen Hurts, to this point, he's showing us he can be good, but can he be that tier of quarterback that he was getting propped up to be? A top 3 level quarterback? I don't think he can. There's too many mistakes that he makes. The pocket awareness has regressed from last season. I think Shane Steichen did a good job at hiding it last year because there was a lot of easy buttons. And then, of course, how can we not mention Brian Johnson? I think the lack of easy buttons in this offense is hurting the running game. It's hurting the passing game. When you have receivers as great as A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, you should be winning matchups with ease. But it seems like most of the time their shots and their explosive plays down the field are goal balls that are heavily contested, and you're relying on these receivers to maintain 50-50 balls.
Which they can.
They can, but it's a hard way to live in the NFL. And on the defense, don't get me started on the defense. I mean, the defense is awful. We all know that. But, man, this team does not feel the same. It does not feel the same. And this is going to be majority of us talking about the Eagles. But before I shift back to you, what the Seahawks did tonight, what Drew Lock has done, Drew Lock wasn't the best, but I feel like since he's been in Seattle, he has matured as a quarterback to the point that Pete Carroll trusted putting Drew Lock in instead of a maybe 50-60% Geno Smith. I think that's a huge credit to their coaching staff. This was a great win. Their defense came up with some timely stops. And Leonard Williams, man, they made the trade for a reason, and he was all over the field. This team, I like this team. It hasn't been perfect. There's been a lot of things going wrong with this team injury-wise. But overall, I'm a fan of Seattle. I am, and I'm glad they got the win at home.
And it's just the way that Geno Smith turned around his career, too. You spend your first couple of years in a really shaky offensive environment. The Jets were defense first. The Broncos were defense first when Drew Lock started his career. And he never had the opportunity to develop until he got to sit behind a veteran for a year and a half. And hey, he went 4-1 as a rookie with that top 10 defense. As you point out, the Seahawks' their defense has come a long way the last couple of years in the front seven. And then offensively, man, we've known how special their weapons are. Kenneth Walker comes back. He was banged up. He has himself a big game. And then, of course, DK Metcalf. Last 2 games, he had 160 and 177 yards versus Seattle. And today didn't come. He had all of his yards basically in the fourth quarter in the second half. But when the offense is clicking for them, I mean, the NFC is a deeper conference than people let out with teams like them specifically.
It is. And the Seahawks win. It kind of ruins the chances of a team that I've been rooting for, the Packers, to make the playoffs. The Packers dropping 2 games to the Buccaneers and the Giants. I mean, what are we doing here? And people will say it's Jordan Love. It's not been Jordan Love. It's been that defense. It's been that defense that's been letting them down the last 2 weeks.
How is Joe Barry still in NFL DC? Like, real talk.
He's
What has he
friends
done?
with Matt LaFleur. That's why he's friends with Matt LaFleur. Now, in the comment section right now, for all you guys watching, number one, make sure you guys like the stream, like the episode. Number two, I want you guys to put names of quarterbacks, and John over here is going to get their stats side by side, and we will compare them. So any quarterback you want us to compare side by side, just put the name in the comments and we'll do it. It can be Tua, it could be Jordan Love, it could be whoever you want. Just do whichever quarterback. Tua versus Hurts. Let's do that one first, Mr. John.
Okay, so Tua versus Jalen Hurts is interesting. For Tua this year, we're looking at 25 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 71% completion percentage, and he is throwing for, I get the yards per game, 280 yards per game. Meanwhile, for Jalen Hurts, if we're including the rushing touchdowns, this is going to look a little bit different, but I'm going to look exclusively at the passing stats. And he's got 10 touchdowns. Sorry, he's got 19 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, completing 66.5% of his passes with 245 passing yards a game.
Tua's playing better than him this year. I want to play a little game with you, John, before we move on to the next segment. What I want to do is Jalen Hurts regressing this year? Where has Jalen Hurts ranked amongst the top quarterbacks? I'm going to give you a list of names, and you tell me if Jalen Hurts has been better than these quarterbacks this season. Number one, has Jalen Hurts been better than Josh Allen?
No, not even close.
Has Jalen Hurts been better than Patrick Mahomes?
No.
Has Jalen Hurts been better than Lamar Jackson?
No, but statistically would say it's like a 50-50, but I think Lamar's had better complete control of his offense.
Has Jalen Hurts been better than Dak Prescott?
No.
Has Jalen Hurts been better than Matthew Stafford?
No.
Has Jalen Hurts been better than Brock Purdy?
Statistically, hell no. I would say no personally, altogether.
I would say no statistically and no with the eye test. That's 6 guys right now. Has Jalen Hurts been better than Tua?
It's close. I think it's close at least. But I'm going to lean Tua Tagovailoa, especially how well he played with Tyreek being out.
I'm leaning with Tua as well. Has Jalen Hurts been better than C.J. Stroud?
No. I'm a huge C.J. Stroud guy. The jet game wasn't great, but with what he's done this year with that weapons, the shitty running game again, the injuries, I have to lean on C.J. Stroud.
This quarterback has been hurt, but when he was healthy, has Jalen Hurts been better than Kirk Cousins?
I would say no personally. Kirk was special.
We're at 8 quarterbacks right now. Has Jalen Hurts been better? Was Jalen Hurts better than Justin Herbert when Herbert was healthy?
Now that one is interesting.
It is pretty interesting. I agree. And you guys answer these while we going too.
I'm going to say Jalen Hurts, but Herbert's been more important to his team's offense and more valuable. So
I'm going with Justin Herbert. We just saw how badly the Chargers got beat without Herbert. One game without Herbert. That doesn't happen in Philadelphia. I'm going with Herbert. Has Jalen Hurts been better than Jared Goff this year?
Goff, man, had himself a hell of a game versus the Broncos. 5 touchdowns, no interceptions.
5 touchdowns.
I'm going to say, if I took Hurts over Herbert, I have to take Hurts over Goff. I screwed myself. I'm taking Herbert over Hurts, and I'm also going to say Jared Goff slightly over Jalen, but to me, this is like a 50-50 sort of matchup.
So far, we are at 11 quarterbacks that have been better than Jalen Hurts so far this season. And I think guys like Jordan Love, people will be like, what? And react crazily to that statement. Jordan Love this year, 25 touchdowns to 11 interceptions, playing with the youngest group of receivers in NFL history with injuries on his offense. His best left tackle, he's hurt right now. Christian Watson has been in and out the lineup. Aaron Jones has been out the lineup for the entirety of the season. I think Jordan Love has been better than Hurts this year.
But it really just comes down to...
Call me crazy, John. Baker Mayfield has a case. Baker Mayfield, he's balling. You look at the numbers. It's similar, John. Trevor Lawrence. What I'm saying that to say, Jalen Hurts this year, he's not played like a top 10 quarterback. He has not. He's played more like a middle of the pack quarterback. And a lot of people will use the rushing touchdowns to strengthen his case. But you and I, we all know that the main engine of the tush push, the brotherly shove, as everybody so calls it, is not Jalen Hurts. It is the offensive line. It is the players pushing number two, and then Hurts comes third. Jalen Hurts on half of the brotherly shove plays, his feet are not even touching the ground. So
And
how
that's
much
where
credit are we giving this guy?
I think it's because, I mean, he squats 600 pounds, which is incredible. But you have to be able to isolate the impressiveness of that feat with the actual functionality of that movement. And like you point out, I mean, a lot of quarterbacks can do that. But there's one more thing that hurts specifically, because I don't think quarterback wins should be the main reason why Jalen Hurts is the top 5 quarterback. And I think we overemphasize the success of Philadelphia with how well Hurts has improved and played the last 2 years. To me, it comes down to Shane Steichen simplifying everything. Last year, the Eagles were an RPO-heavy team, and it really simplified the game for Jalen to where you didn't have to think or really process defenses, and they were more effective targeting the short to intermediate attack. This year, Gardner Minshew, what's the most RPO-heavy team in the NFL? It's been in Indianapolis, and they've done that with a variety of different guys under center. And to me, it's really highlighted just how much of a genius the Eagles had. And when you lose that, you're usually not going to replace him with somebody who's immediately going to be spectacular, especially if Brian Johnson's making play calls for the first time in the NFL. And I truly believe that Shane Steichen right now is a top 10, top 12 coach. If you want to say he's got to prove for longer, that's fine. As a play caller specifically, I think he's one of the 10 best in the NFL. And so the regression has made the game so much more complicated for Jalen, so to speak. And it's made everything for Philadelphia's offense more predictable. I remember today one of their RPOs was broken up by Seahawks DB. There's just not that same level of congruence from last year. And that's why I think the quarterback wins in and of itself. Everyone's going to use that as Jalen Hurts' thing. I think it plays a smaller role in the case. But it's always just been the coaching to me, which has elevated him to be that top 5 quarterback. Right now, I think he's probably 9 or 10, and that's pretty impressive. But I don't think it's at the level to where this guy can carry your offense week in and week out.
That's pretty impressive, but for the amount of hype that he got, I don't think it really is. I think that when quarterbacks win, they tend to get more credit than sometimes they deserve. In some instances, they do deserve the credit. In some, they don't. I think with Jalen Hurts, it's more like a 50-50 proposition. The Eagles were a great team. Last year, it had an easy schedule. They were stacked. This year, they were pretty good in the gauntlet part of their schedule, but I don't think the Eagles outplayed the Chiefs. I don't think the Eagles outplayed the Bills. Jalen Hurts didn't outplay Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes. He didn't outplay Dak Prescott in either of the 2 matches versus Dallas. In the first matchup, Dak played better than him. In all the games that they won in their gauntlet, Jalen Hurts did not outplay the opposing quarterback. Yet, after the Bills game, he was propped up as MVP odds-on favorite. But, everything always comes back down to earth, and we're seeing the true colors right now. I want to say this. How idiotic are the Chargers feeling, and maybe the Eagles feeling in the future, for not making Shane Steichen a head coach? I know at the time you don't do it. For the Chargers, it's a bit different. They had Anthony Lynn at the time. They fired him. They could have very well made Shane Steichen a head coach. The Chargers fumbled Shane Steichen. That's a fact. And then we see how Brandon Staley's turned out. That was a generational fumble. For the Eagles, Nick Sirianni has been fine. They have been winning with him. So I give the Eagles some slack. But years from now, we might be looking at the Chargers and the Eagles and saying, man, Shane Steichen was in your building. He's one of the top head coaches, and you let him go because, like you mentioned, last year with Jalen Hurts, they were pushing all the easy buttons. And this year with Gardner Minshew's having a fine season with the Indianapolis Colts right now, with Shane Steichen calling plays. The Colts are winning games, and he's changing the entire culture of that Colts team. I'm reading this super chat right now from Big Chief. Big Chief goes, Seahawk Nation, we up. Stop sleeping on us. DK Lock was on a heater. They indeed were. What's up, John? What's up, John?
No, sorry about that. I just had something play off my phone. I agree with that comment, man. I mean, when Geno gets right and their offensive line's developed, it's a top 10 offense and it's a top 15 defense. And this NFC, I mean, that can win you a playoff game. But one more point with the Shane Steichen. It's a lot like the Browns when they had Mike McDaniel, Kyle Shanahan, And I'm not sure if Sean McVay was part of that staff because he stayed in Washington with Jay Gruden. But the Browns had two of the top. Oh, it was the third one, Matt LaFleur, all on the same coaching staff, and none of them became the coach. And it's a lot like that where Steichen, he started off as a Chargers assistant, went to the Browns in 2013, and all of those teams, it is something to look back at the same way to do a Brian Dable because that's how you sustain elite level quarterback play. You continue to develop the most important position in the sport. That's why we talk about it so much.
Moving forward, who do you trust more, the Dallas Cowboys or the Philadelphia Eagles? I mean, you look at the Cowboys, and the Cowboys just got beat bad on the road versus the Bills, and the Bills exposed their biggest weakness, which is defending the run. For the Eagles, they just lost to the Seahawks on the road with a Drew Lock-led Seahawks team. As of right now, Week 15 is over. Who do you trust more, the Dallas Cowboys or the Philadelphia Eagles moving forward?
I trust the Dallas Cowboys more. It's going to bite me in the ass. And you want to know why? I believe Dallas defensively has the superstar level talent that Philadelphia doesn't quite have right now to solve a lot of the mistakes. And we're looking at the Eagles. Last year, they had that level of superstar play at edge, at cornerback. This year, I think that's where Dallas is the edge. And there's a reason in the NFC East, we haven't had a repeat champion since 2004. Each year in this type of division, it's going to be a new type of team. Where last year was Philadelphia, I think this year Dallas had a very slight edge. And just Dak Prescott's playing like a top 5 quarterback. I know they had a very tough loss versus the Bills, but I think Buffalo is in the thick of everything. They're a top 3 team right now. And I don't think that one poor matchup where the Bills came away with a beautiful game plan to exploit the Cowboys' weaknesses is enough for me to turn my back on them. I've seen enough this year, at least seen enough the last couple of weeks specifically to say I think the Cowboys.
Who would have thought that before the season I would be saying I trust Mike McCarthy and his offensive scheme more than I trust Nick Sirianni and Brian Johnson's offensive scheme and ability to call plays. I trust the Cowboys defense more than the Eagles. I could have seen myself saying that before the season because the Cowboys defense was awesome on paper. And I trust Dak Prescott more than Jalen Hurts. Dak is playing better than Jalen Hurts. I do trust the Cowboys. From this 3-game losing streak that the Eagles have been on, there have been alarming signs to the defense, alarming signs to the offense and the flow of their offense, the mistakes that Hurts has made. He's thrown 1 touchdown to 2 interceptions, I believe. I trust the Cowboys more than the Eagles. I agree with you, John. We got a super chat from Dave Baker here. Goff versus Flores and Minnesota defense next week, or Flacco versus DeMeco Ryans Houston defense next week. Can't decide for fantasy. We got a fantasy question. I love it. I really love it. If I'm going to go with one, so are you trying to start a quarterback or are you trying to start a defense? I need that piece of information right now, Dave Baker. Because if you're trying to start a defense, I would start DeMeco Ryans defense against Joe Flacco.
I would probably go with the Texans defense personally, because I feel like Flacco's interceptions were noteworthy. Might see that regression. If you're looking at the quarterback specifically, I think I would have to go Goff personally, just because he's been playing at a much higher ceiling. And Flacco, look, he's played adequate for an NFL starter, but Jared Goff, you're getting a top 10, top 12 fantasy quarterback rather consistently. And I think his rough days of the season are probably behind him.
I would go with Jared Goff. We just saw what Jake Browning did to the Vikings defense. I don't think there's some defense that is untouchable where Joe Flacco, do you really trust what he's going to give you? I mean, before the Browns made the comeback, he had 3 interceptions in the game. I mean, Joe Flacco can lay a stinker. So even if Goff lays a stinker, you're comfortable with it because you say, you know what? It was a right decision. Yeah. He's been the better player. And like I said, the Vikings defense isn't a juggernaut that can completely stop this Lions offense and Jared Goff. I feel like last week they really found their identity again running the football. So I'd go with Jared Goff. I'm going with Jared Goff.
And Dave confirmed there was a quarterback he was looking to start.
We're going to talk about this game, John. Lions beat the Broncos 42-17. I picked the Broncos to win in this game. And even though I picked the Broncos, I said on Pick 'em, by the way, if you're not signed up to Patreon, make sure you sign up to Patreon. We drop a new episode every single week exclusively for you guys. I said the Broncos' defensive weakness is their run defense. They have not been able to stop the run. Their run success rate was one of the worst since they've they've turned around their defense. So that's been the weakness, and they haven't faced a dominant rushing attack. I thought the Lions would win on the ground. I thought this game would be high scoring in the manner that both teams would be scoring back and forth. But I think, John, is that in this game, the Broncos' offensive limitations really showed. And I think the Lions got back to what they do best. It's running the football. It's having Jared Goff under center, play action passes, getting explosives that way. I think when the Lions play like that, they're at their best. And their defense played well. They stopped the run. They were disciplined in coverage. So I think this was a great sign for Lions fans moving forward to the fact that you got back on track to what the Lions have been in the beginning of the season.
Well said. When this team was healthy with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, the common criticism was that DeMont was getting all of the workload. But we're starting to see there is a level of efficiency that Jahmyr Gibbs brings that so few running backs in football can. 11 touches, 100 yards. And then you've got the change of pace of Montgomery. I think in that dome, their environment, they're one of the toughest teams to beat in the NFL. When Jared Goff's playing at a pretty high level and their defense is playing one of the easiest get-right offenses, let's be real. I've not been a big believer in the Broncos, and it's funny because Drew made a bet with Riv on this show that they would get at least 7 wins. I did the same exact thing. My brother is a G fan. I've not been a believer in this Denver offense at all, which ranks 16th in scoring. The only reason why they've been winning games to me, it's a big reason. It's the fact that they've dominated in the turnover battle 18-3 in their wins the last 2 months. But if they're not generating turnovers at a high level versus Kansas City and Buffalo, their offense to me is simply not anywhere near good enough in the NFL. As a Steeler fan, it reminds me very much of us. In an offense-driven league, the Broncos have an inefficient rushing attack. They don't have dynamic wide receivers. Outside of Cortland Sutton, there's not that weapon that Russell Wilson can really rely on. And he has been a pseudo game manager for a guy making over $200 million. And so I look at Denver, and I'm like, I feel like this is going to come crashing down. They're going to win 8 or 9 games. But ultimately, much like my Pittsburgh Steelers, we see it week to week, they have to be nearly flawless defensively to win games. And where they've been incredible on that side of the ball last 2 months, quite frankly, in a matchup like this, where they don't have that magic and they lose the turnover battle 1-0, opposed to win at 5-1, I don't think they really stand a chance of any of the top tier teams, like the top 10 offenses, I should say, that really can explode in a given week.
So shout out to Drew. Drew is in the comment section right now. Happy birthday to my brother. First and foremost, make sure you guys are putting happy birthday in the chat. Listen, John, you had to disrespect the Broncos because they deserve the disrespect. After losing 42-17, they deserve all the slander in the world. They deserve the disrespect because they might have cost themselves a shot at the playoffs. I think you mentioned it perfectly. Russell Wilson has been a game manager. Their defense, I do disagree with you on that point because I think their defense is better than just winning on the turnover margin. Turnover margin is always bound to regress. Turnovers are bound to regress, but I do think the Broncos are doing things schematically to limit offenses. But you're right. That offense has to keep up pace. And listen, Russell Wilson, I know after last year, his down year was terrible. There were just different expectations for him coming into this year, right? The expectation was just get back to being a good quarterback, but we cannot let that expectation be the norm because before he got traded to the Broncos, the expectation was be the franchise quarterback of this franchise, be the difference maker in games in which we did not have that quarterback to be the difference maker in games before. So just because Russell Wilson had a terrible year last year, I am not removing that initial expectation from him. I still should expect, given the price point that he has, to play at a top 10 level in the NFL. I should still expect them to be able to carry an offense that doesn't have much juice because he is Russell Wilson. He is a Hall of Famer to a lot of people, and if that's the case, you got to hold him to a Hall of Fame standard. He doesn't get a different standard just because he had a terrible year. The Broncos offense is the definition of mid. They are inconsistent, and I think that's the hesitancy with them is that they have to play a certain way. They have to run the ball. They have to play good defense. Russ has to make good decisions and good passes and move the chains just enough for them to win. They cannot win shootouts and they cannot be explosive. And I think that's the major weakness with the team.
I do want to add one thing because they do get a good amount of pressure. Nick Bonito and Jonathan Cooper.
They do.
They have a very good defense altogether. That's not even the criticism, but the disappointing part to me has been offensively. I, like many people, been a very big fan of Javonte Williams, but coming off one of the worst possible knee injuries you could have, this year his efficiency has not really been the same. And if he was supposed to be the number one option in your offense, now you're kind of on some lower level wide receivers to up. I'm shocked, quite frankly, with this level of weaponry that they are 16th in points per game. Because when you look at the overall talent, it's bottom 3 or 4 in the NFL altogether. And I think it's a credit to Sean Payton. One of the chat today in the comments, the questions is, do you think Russ is a game manager because of Sean Payton?
I don't think he's a game manager because of Sean Payton. I think he's a game manager because Sean Payton realizes the limitations that he has as a quarterback. And he knows the only way to get success out of Russ that's sustainable is to be a play action heavy offense and to kind of have the training wheels on Russ a bit.
I would agree with you, but I feel like if we put Russell Wilson back into Seattle, not a great offensive line, but we gave him DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and JSN, we would see a quarterback a lot closer out of structure to that. Because let's be real, like what has really declined? The athleticism, some, but I feel like with Russell Wilson, it's more of a talent thing personally. And this is how Sean Payton has to coach him, given they just don't have. I think Marvin Mims can be one of these weapons. They've got one in the waiting. They just don't have enough dynamic playmakers after the catch or separating.
And I think Marvin Mims is one of those players that he shows flashes and he's intriguing, but they only run him on go routes. They really don't trust him to run any other route. And I think at this point, it's he's more of a gadget player, still needs to develop. Now, this win from the Lions was huge because after the Eagles loss, I mean, you have a Lions team that's 10-4. You have an Eagles team that's 10-4. I mean, the Lions can very well get the second seed in the NFC and now have home field advantage against anybody outside of San Francisco. In their next 3 games, they face the Vikings on the road, they face the Cowboys on the road, and they face the Vikings at home. So in 2 of the next 3 games, they're facing a Nick Mullins-led Vikings team. I think you can count on the Lions to win 12 games as a floor, and that Cowboys game will be the deciding factor for if they can be the second seed in the NFC or not.
So you're maybe back on the win a playoff game here in the wild card round?
I'm not back on a Lions train. I'm just saying it's a scenario. I will say the Lions do deserve some respect because this is the first time they have gone to the playoffs in a while. This is the first time they're winning the NFC North since the 1990s. So they deserve respect. There's still some skepticism around this team, but I think I can still say that I love what they've done this year. I want to talk about the Bills beating the Cowboys 31-10, John, because there are 2 takeaways from this game. The one takeaway is that the Bills are one of the hottest teams in the NFL, and we have seen this story before, right? We have seen the story of a team getting hot at the right time, and they run the table, they make the Super Bowl, and sometimes they win it, and sometimes they don't. But I think right now the people are putting the Bills in that sort of category where the Cowboys just came off an emotional, great win against the Philadelphia Eagles. But the one Achilles heel for the team is that they are an average team on the road. They now fall to 4-5 on the road. They go on the road next week against Miami. So really, the question I want to ask you is, do you think the Bills have the capabilities to run the table in the AFC? Do you view them now as a top-tier AFC contender? And are the Cowboys scaring you a little bit? Because since they lost this game, the shot at them winning the NFC East is slim. And in order to have home field advantage, even in one playoff game, they needed to secure it.
I'll tell you one thing. Let's start off with the Bills. Ever since Joe Brady has come in for Ken Dorsey, this has been the exact team that we've been waiting for 4 years. Because Buffalo's had the talent offensively. James Cook is averaging 6 yards a carry down there. Dalton Kincaid was tight end one of the best tight end classes we've seen in quite some time. Buffalo has playmakers at every single position, and a focal point, Stephon Diggs, who's probably top 10 weapon, top 5 wide receiver in all of football. They've got a variety of different guys who can beat you. And when Josh Allen is playing at this high of level, what it really comes down to is, like Luka Doncic in the NBA, you need to simplify his role. If Josh Allen's throwing the ball 40 times a game and he's doing everything, making every single decision, you're bound to have a variety of turnover-worthy plays because at the end of the day, the more you do, the more slip-ups there are going to be. But if Luka Doncic is paired alongside a Kyrie Irving who can take some of the responsibility off his plate, not only does his level of mistakes decrease, but his effectiveness is going to improve because now you're a multi-dimensional team. I felt like with Buffalo, they needed to rely on the ground. And a game where Josh Allen finishes with what, 100 passing yards? They're
Less than
able
100 passing
to
yards.
he had 94 passing yards on 7 completions, and they scored 31 points on a Cowboys defense at home. I felt like the Bills' defense was going to hold them back this year, and it probably will in the playoffs because it has the last 2.5 years. But they've even gotten very good play of unlikely contributors like Rasul Douglas, Leonard Fournette, Gregory Rousseau. A lot of different guys have stepped up. And as they say, one man's misfortune is another man's missed opportunity. Sorry, I completely butchered that. I'm not going to try it again. But with Buffalo, this offense can knock out any team. And I think this is, much like the last couple of years, another opportunity for them to run the table. The Cowboys, on their hands, I just felt like this was a bad matchup for them. The way the Bills utilized James Cook out the backfield, getting him in motion versus the right types of linebackers and coverage. I mean, he had himself 200 yards. It was the right type of game plan. And I feel like Dallas had that rough week, as you alluded to. But I don't think it's the type of loss that's defeating or is going to put your team down. I think it's a learning experience. The Cowboys need to remember, hey, look, much like the Philadelphia 76ers of the NBA, no matter how well we play in the regular season, the only thing that matters when you got a Super Bowl or bust expectation is how far you go in the playoffs. So I'm not really too worried about this specific loss.
I feel for the Cowboys because they have built up all this momentum. Dak was front runner for MVP, and this performance in which his play wasn't really his fault. There was really nothing down the field, and he had to hold on to the ball a bunch. And I think that's a credit to Sean McDermott because they were changing up the picture on Dak post snap. And I think what's going to get lost in all this is that Sean McDermott is a pretty damn great defensive coach. He is. He got a head coaching job because of his job he did with the Carolina Panthers in 2015 when they had the number 1 ranked defense in the NFL and they went 15-1. Cam Newton was the MVP, but the unsung hero of that year was the defense. They were historically great. They were one of the best defenses I've seen watching football. Great news for the Bills. 19 total dropbacks for Josh Allen on 65 snaps. That's a dropback rate of 29%, the lowest of Josh Allen's career. And they won this game. James Cook set career highs in carries and rushing yards over expectation and success rate. And I feel like Joe Brady coming in and calling plays has unlocked this rushing offense. They have utilized not only James Cook, but Josh Allen more in the run game. And now James Cook, surprisingly, is up to 1,401 scrimmage yards on a year, which is 3rd in the NFL. We're talking about a top 10 back right now that they really haven't been utilizing until Joe Brady got the job. And I think some unsung things about the Bills is the fact that in the offseason, they hired the Rams offensive line coach and run game coordinator, Aaron Kramer, which this year, by far, is the best offensive line that Josh Allen has had of his career. The running game looks to be the most efficient, and it does feel like they're getting hot at the right time. I always go back to the 2021 playoffs in a playoff run that I feel like Josh Allen was perfect in, and it will not be remembered at all because it didn't end in winning a championship. But when you look at the numbers, he averaged over 300 yards passing, 77% completion percentage, 9 touchdowns to 0 interceptions, 149 passer rating. I mean, this playoff run in the game where he dueled with Mahomes and they went back and forth, this put him, for a lot of people, including myself, as he might be the best quarterback in the NFL. And I think Josh Allen is capable of that. But when you are not asking him to be Superman every single game, I now like the Bills' chances even more. And there's something about a team being with their backs against the wall. Sean McDermott coaching for his job, because we know if they don't go on a deep playoff run, he might not be the coach next year. The drama between Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, the injuries this team has had, it feels like if they do get into the playoffs, which I think they will, it's going to be a tough out for anybody. And at this point, I'm kind of saying, you know what? I might write them in as an AFC Championship team already because they're playing that good, and the defense doesn't have the brand names, but they still play sound and they still play great football, and they limit just enough for, I think, a team that can go really far.
Well said. The Bills currently are the ninth seed outside the playoffs. Oh, this can't be. Is this even right? 8-6. That's crazy to think in this AFC. What is the right type of matchup for them if they don't win the division? Because the Dolphins are 2 games ahead, and they're most likely going to win that East to really allow Buffalo to get that best possible chance to win the Super Bowl.
I think the Bills match up great against the Dolphins. Believe it or not, I think they match up great against the Ravens. The Ravens, there's something about them. Yes, they're the first seed in the AFC, but there's something about them that you inherently don't kind of trust like that. Lamar Jackson, he has turnovers in bad spots. The defense is great, right, statistically, but the Jaguars were able to move down the field on them with ease, and I think the Bills' offense is better. I don't know if the Ravens are as good as just kind of stamping them as the standalone team in the AFC. I don't think they're that. I think in the AFC, if I were to make a 3-team race, it's the Chiefs, it's the Ravens, and it's the Bills. And I think the next team up would be the Dolphins as that wild card, but you don't trust Tua in that situation yet. And I think the Bills can beat every team. There's not a team that I don't think is a terrible matchup, because outside of the Dolphins, what team in the AFC has outstanding firepower offensively that can exploit the Bills' defense on a drive-to-drive basis?
There's none. The Bengals would, but you don't know if Jake Brown's going to sustain this level of play.
Exactly, and I don't think the Bengals, and now also Jamar Chase is hurt. He's probably going to be out for some time. So he's hurt with the separated shoulder. Jake Browning will not sustain this level of play, even though to this point he has been great for them. He has been good. He's been good enough. He has been good enough. I don't want to overhype him too much because people are starting to say nasty things about Jake Browning. But, I think the Bills match up great against anybody. They really do. I think they even match up great against teams in the NFC. This is a dangerous team. We know the obvious standalone team is the Niners, and that's what I'm going to get to right now because we got this super chat from Bennett Gala. I hope I'm saying that right. Start the San Francisco talk. Bills and Seahawks beat mid teams. Easy. The Niners are the best team in the NFL. I really don't know what else to say at this point. I mean, they're the best team in the NFL. They're a team that is going to feature 8 All-Pros, most likely. They're going to have 8 All-Pros and even more Pro Bowlers. I mean, this team is stacked from top to bottom. If they don't win a Super Bowl this year, it's going to be a huge letdown.
Exactly. And I'm looking to see the team with the most Pro Bowl selections ever in a single season. And it's the Ravens and the Dolphins, 73 Dolphins, and the 2019 Ravens with a total of 12. Mm-hmm. When looking down the 49ers roster, I think there might be more. There's definitely at least 7 or 8 when you're including the wide receivers. I don't think Tebow's got the production altogether, but as you point out, they're third in offense with 30 points per game, and they're second in defense with 16. And this is probably the most well-coached they've ever been. Clint Kubiak's come in, and they've had a very good coach staff to kind of fill the different assistants who have left, whether it was Bobby Slowick, D'Amico Ryan, Steve Wilkes comes in. And I felt like with them, the big question mark was just the offensive line. But with the continuity they've got on the right side, and one of the most athletic freak left tackles you're ever going to see in Trent Williams, they've got 2 MVP candidates. There's really nothing else to add. If they stay healthy, I think they're kind of it sounds very dire, I guess, for the NFC, but they're kind of a shoo-in to go to the Super Bowl if they are relatively healthy.
That offensive line point is interesting because their offensive line statistically is ranked near the bottom of the NFL. They're not a great unit, but I think what people miss in that piece of information is the fact that you don't need to have a great or elite offensive line when you have so much motion and misdirection in your offense, because teams cannot just straight away rush the passer. They have to account for setting the edge in case Depot comes on a sweep or CMC. They have to do so many things to the point that it kind of negates the pass rush. So even though statistically they're a bottom unit, on film, it doesn't really look that way because they're not asking their offensive linemen to hold up for large sums amount of time. They're just not.
And you got to keep in mind, too, the coaching is you get your wide receivers to block. Juwan Jennings, Brandon Ayuk, Debo, all those different skill position players, CMC, they're going to do a very good job helping that aspect as well. And that's what they're getting out into space and kicking teams' ass.
So Day Trooper GW made a great point. And by the way, I want to shout out Dave Baker for giving a compliment to my camera setup. I really appreciate that, Dave. Day Trooper GW said, AFC East still very much up for grabs if Buffalo keeps winning and Miami loses to either Dallas or Baltimore prior to playing Buffalo last game of the year. Buffalo's last game of the year, well, next three is the Chargers, Patriots, and Dolphins. I think the Bills win the next two. They'll be 10-6. And the Dolphins' next three are the Cowboys, the Ravens, and the Bills. Yeah, it's a huge possibility the Dolphins could not win the AFC East.
I think the Bills are winning out here. But is it crazy to say the Dolphins could also win out? I mean, the Week 18 game is going to be the biggest deciding factor, but
the Dolphins are 10-4.
I feel like Miami can definitely on Christmas Eve beat the Cowboys because there's a lot of expectations the Cowboys are coming to knock them out. I feel like the Dolphins can win 13 games this year. It's possible. Even if we don't think they can beat good teams, if Tyreek Hill can get back, I mean, it's possible. I don't know.
Listen, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say the Bills are winning the AFC East. And I'm saying that because you look at the next three games for each team, the Dolphins are 10-4, but they face the Cowboys, they face the Ravens, then they face the Bills Week 18. The Bills face the Chargers, they face the Patriots, then they face Miami Week 18. Right. I think the Bills should be a shoo-in to win the next two games. That puts them at 10-6 before the Week 18 matchup versus the Dolphins. The Dolphins, I think they win one of the Cowboys and Ravens game. But based on the track record, they could lose both. But let's say they win one. That puts them at 10-5 heading into that Week 18 matchup with the Bills at 10-6. I believe I'm doing the math right. I might be doing it. Oh, no, that puts them – it puts the Dolphins at 11-5 before the Week 18 matchup and the Bills at 10-6. If the Bills beat the Dolphins Week 18 because the Bills beat them earlier in the season, they would hold the tiebreaker. All the Bills need is for the Dolphins to lose one of the Cowboys or Ravens game. The Cowboys coming off a loss to the Bills in embarrassing fashion, that's not going to be easy. And against the Ravens, that's not going to be easy. It's very likely Week 18 could be a AFC East division crown game.
I'm with it. And you know what? Looking at the Dolphins' injury report, their offensive line itself, it is pretty treacherous. It is reasonable to say they can win all three of these games. They could also lose all three of them as well because they still have to prove themselves against those higher-end opponents.
They really do. Brock Purdy for MVP. We got the 49ers stuff. People are clamoring for the 49ers stuff in the comment section, wanting us to talk about it. So let's talk about it. Brock Purdy for MVP. What I really want to get from you, John, is that would you be mad if Brock Purdy won MVP this year?
I wouldn't be mad to see an underdog win the greatest award of them all. But at the end of the day, what I mean to say to you is that Brock Purdy deserves a hand in the race. There have been left talks this year. People have said a lot of different players in the Niners are more valuable. But to me, at the end of the day, when looking at San Francisco, it's hard for me to make a case that Brock is more valuable than CMC. And I feel like in the NFL today, there is an overemphasis on quarterback play because it's far and away the most important position. But when talking about the infrastructure in San Francisco, the most irreplaceable player has, and I think will for a little bit longer here until Brock takes another step forward because he can, is going to be CMC because the running back position's been such a consistent turnstile through injuries. And for CMC this year to have 20 touchdowns, to be as efficient as he is, as incredible in the red zone, the game changer that he is, the most valuable player award to me will always have to be the guy who you cannot live without. I think if you take CMC out of this offense, you're going to see a lot more games like versus Cleveland where they're losing these one-score affairs, one-score games. To me, Brock is probably third or fourth in the race. And I think that's completely fine. But it would be a mistake to me if he won over CMC personally, or Tyreek Hill, quite frankly.
It was interesting because George Kittle was asked this question, and George Kittle picked Christian McCaffrey to win MVP.
Right.
And his reasoning was defenses have to play the Niners differently because CMC is back there. I agree with that reasoning. And if you look at all the numbers, I mean, it points to McCaffrey being the most valuable player on this team. Since McCaffrey joined the 49ers, they've been unstoppable over the past 2 years with McCaffrey on the field. The 49ers success rate is 49.3%, and EPA per play is 0.17. That is second in recent history, only to 2018 Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs offense, which was one of the greatest offenses that we've seen in history. So since CMC has joined the Niners, and this has been with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback because he played some time with Jimmy Garoppolo, they have been this dominant. I say that to say this. I don't think Purdy is undeserving. I don't think Brock Purdy should not be in consideration for it. And I think ultimately he will win it just because this is a quarterback-centric award. I will say this, though. This is either, if Brock wins MVP, which is looking like he will, this will either years down the line be a grave mistake or a sigh of relief. And that goes either way, because if he doesn't win it years down the line, we can say, you know what? Brock, 4 or 5 years later, has proved he can play at a high level without a stacked supporting cast. But we can also say, wow, Brock Purdy fell off without the stacked supporting cast. So I think whether he wins it or he loses it, in either direction, it can either be looked at as a mistake or a sigh of relief if he wins it or if he loses it. But it's no shame in winning. I mean, Rich Gannon won MVP, who was a career journeyman quarterback and then won the award out of nowhere. I mean, we've seen stuff like this happen, but Brock Purdy, last pick in the draft, he's still young. He's still improving. I think from early on in the season to now, he has gotten better. He has limited his mistakes. He has played with a ton of aggressiveness. I mean, that is – I tip my hat to Brock Purdy, but I think it is still very fine to say that we don't know what he's going to be yet. I think every fan that is kind of propping him up as the next Tom Brady, it's like we don't know what he is yet. If he can sustain a level of excellence without a great supporting cast, then we get our answer. But if he falls off, everybody that's kind of on the Brock, anti-Brock wave is going to be kind of taking a victory lap around that.
And it's always going to come down to storylines. Purdy, last pick in the draft, coming off UCL surgery, just 3 losses in 2 years as a starter. But I think the storylines oftentimes are really meshed together with the numbers, and it becomes a little bit too numbers-oriented. The numbers are incredible to me because he sustained them throughout this year. But I think, as you've highlighted, throughout the years in San Francisco, we've seen Jimmy Garoppolo put up, top 10 quarterback seasons. Garoppolo leaves, and this is part of the reason why, to me, I think Brock's a better quarterback than Jimmy G. His structure is more accurate, a little bit more mobile, better pocket presence. But how much better of a quarterback is Purdy relative to Garoppolo? That's my question. Is he significantly better? I think he's clearly better. And we were never really saying Jimmy Garoppolo is a surefire MVP candidate. We're saying he's perfect for this system, and this is the marriage it's meant to be.
And I think the perfect storm for Brock Purdy happened because in previous years, we have seen great quarterbacks not win. 2011 Drew Brees, 2009 Drew Brees. But in those years, there was always a quarterback with better numbers. I mean, we look Aaron Rodgers in 2011. The Packers went 15-1. 2009, Peyton Manning, he won it. This year, there is not a standout quarterback with standout numbers this year. And I think it's the perfect storm where, I mean, in previous years, a little under 35 passing touchdowns does not win you the MVP in previous years for a quarterback. I mean, if you win MVP, you have to throw 40-plus passing touchdowns or have 40-plus touchdowns total, passing and rushing. So I think the perfect storm happened for Brock Purdy, where there's not a standout player with stats to back his case.
Exactly. There's no Rodgers, no Brady, and no Mahomes. And even Josh Allen this year. He's not winning up quite enough games. So, yeah, this might be his, Purdy can be a top 10 quarterback next decade, but this right here might be his best chance to ever win the award. Obviously, could have the supporting cast, but that as well.
Vayports goes, let's go Wolves, 17-point comeback and win number 21 seed. John, it's killing me because I was 1 year early on the Timberwolves, baby. 1 year early.
I had them as number 1 seed last year as well. And you know what it feels like to me? I made this tweet and people took it very negatively. The Minnesota Timberwolves this year are just like, they're almost the exact carbon copy of the 2021 Utah Jazz. The first year Utah acquired Mike Conley and Bojan Bogdanovic, there was expectations because they'd gone on playoff runs previously and built a little bit of hype with Donovan Mitchell. But the first year together it ended in disappointment. They blew a 3-1 lead. Last year, Minnesota doesn't realize that expectation. They're in an 8 seed. But the second year together with continuity, Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert, the star shooting guard, and a great supporting cast with a very good up-and-coming head coach, they click. They find a formula in the regular season. And while everyone's clamoring for Karl Anthony Towns to be traded, back then people didn't think the Rudy Gobert extension was a smart decision. Those two teams have built probably the best formula in the regular season to winning games. Their combination of depth, star power, and just versatility in that starting lineup, it's their own unique way of winning games. And I think this year they're going to be the number 1 seed, and they've got themselves a damn good case of winning their first playoff series in my lifetime. So it's been a little bit.
And my boy Anthony Edwards, he got caught up, John. I don't know if you've seen it, but he got caught up. You know, something that he said in text messages was trending.
I didn't see it. Maybe
where the video? Send the video. That's what was trending, John. You got to take a little research. But even despite that, Anthony Edwards goes out there and drops 30. I mean, wow. Phenomenal. Wow. Look into it, John. Look into it. Familiarize yourself with what's happening in the streets, John. I want to say something about the Timberwolves real quick. This team can make the finals, John. This team can make it out the West, John. It can. And I've spoken into this microphone, not this exact one, but a lot of other ones, on camera plenty of times talking about the Timberwolves. Sometimes disappointed, sometimes excited, sometimes ecstatic. What I will say, I don't think not once I ever suggested trading Karl Anthony Towns until you see it through one more season. And this is why. Yeah. Because Cat's value is in the dumpster. And ultimately, when you win in the NBA, it's because you have 2 all-star talents, sometimes 3. Regardless of the negativity around Cat, he's an exceptional player. And if the Wolves want to get to where they want to get to, he has to be exceptional along with Anthony Edwards.
It's well said. And you know what? I'm one of those people that's clamored for them to trade Cat because financially, they cannot keep this current group together with Anthony's new extension coming in. So if this is the one shot they have with him, it's good. He's going to play very, very much every single game this year. And he's also going to defend at the best level he ever has. He's also
Mr. John, I have no idea what just happened to Mr. John right here. His connection just went out. But yes, listen, I'm a believer in the Minnesota Timberwolves, and we're getting John back up here right now because John's connection just went out. Mr. John, how you doing?
It's great to be back. As I was saying, Cat's defending the highest he ever has. He's the most efficient he's ever been. He's playing the most games he ever has. That's the perfect trio for a number 2 star. And I think if he continues to play 70 games this year, as you've pointed out, they're going to have a chance to build the continuity they couldn't last year. And with their level of perimeter defense, 3-point shooting off the bench, and general playmaking, I think it's Cat's number 1 opportunity to establish himself in the postseason because that is the big question mark. If he can play the way he has inconsistently, invariably in the playoffs, we are talking about a team that can set that finals expectation. But I just want to focus with them again, the first seed first, because they've had some shit go down the last couple of years, and I don't want to let myself or their fan base down again. And quite frankly, I think you should just enjoy this while you got it.
Listen, John, you're smart. You're tricky. I just want to say this. I don't condone what Anthony Edwards did, all right? If you're watching this and you're saying, do you support him? I do not support him. I do not. What he did was reckless, bad decision-making. I mean, listen, man, wrap it up. And the text messages, I was disappointed. I wasn't sure if they were real or not. Then I woke up and he made a statement and I said, "Oh, they were real." Disappointed Anthony Edwards fan for sure. I was today when I seen that message. Bennett Gala goes Brock or CMC for MVP, same as Leinart or Bush for Heisman.
Yeah,
It's similar. Yeah, I think it's similar.
I'm with it.
Nice comparison.
I like it.
Angel Botello just sent a super chat, and he also sent a message. This is his message. Steelers are trading for Justin Herbert next year. How do you feel about that, John?
In theory, I'd be very happy. Unfortunately, he's got a $130 million cap hit, so I don't know if the Chargers will be able to digest that potential trade. The Pittsburgh Steelers, quite frankly, need a lot of different things right now. What the Chargers need is a great head coach. And if I were them, their ownership's been a huge mess. If they hire Bill Belichick this offseason, I think Justin Herbert will be the first Chargers quarterback to really be lifted into that opportunity of winning the Super Bowl. So I'll be happy as a Steeler fan, but for LA, they have to do everything they can to keep him.
Before we wrap up this night, John, something that Anthony Edwards should have did. Before we wrap up this night, John, what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about one of my favorite players in the NFL right now.
Let's do it.
That's Baker Mayfield, baby. Baker Mayfield. I mean, Baker Mayfield, his story, and we have Angel right here that just put in the chat. Have you guys talked about the Browns yet? We have not. We'll make sure to give them a little bit of love at the end of the stream. Baker Mayfield had a perfect passer rating against the Green Bay Packers in Week 15. The first visiting quarterback to have a perfect passer rating at Lambeau Field in NFL history. Now, that can speak to Baker Mayfield's greatness, or that can speak to Joe Barry's defense. I think it does a little bit to both. The success I'm seeing Baker Mayfield have, John, is putting a smile on my face. It's making me have tears. Maybe leading the Buccaneers to the playoffs. I mean, who would have thought that years ago Baker Mayfield would lead the Bucs to the playoffs before Deshaun Watson led the Browns to the playoffs?
Well, it's also the division, but
how about you respect Baker, John? How about you respect him?
Here's what I'll tell you. What he's done this year has been incredible to me because in Cleveland, Baker got to count on one of the best rushing attacks in football. Definitely the best in the one of the two best with the Ravens in the AFC. The Buccaneers have the worst rushing attack in football, and they have the last 2 years. But their offense has still been one of the better units because Baker Mayfield, their weapons, has been some of the more explosive in the NFL. And to see him winning games in a division where it's wide open, where he's going to get to host a playoff game this year, when the Buccaneers last year were bounced out unceremoniously, to me, it's just a heartwarming story with Mayfield because every step of the way, there's been highs and there have been lows, but I think he deserves credit for staying the course, being this leader for all of his teams to galvanize them. That intangible trait is something that most franchise quarterbacks do have. There is a confidence, a poise, and a will to lead teams that I think a guy like Joe Burrow, that's what he did to bring the Bengals to the Super Bowl. And every quarterback has to have it to be successful and to stick around in the NFL. If that is Baker Mayfield's elite trait, I don't think his story is finished. And I think that's an exciting thing for Buccaneer fans because they can build up their offensive line more. They can upgrade the defense. And maybe, just maybe, he is the franchise quarterback after Tom Brady. They can build a very good team around because right now in the CSC South, a lot of teams took swings. Most of them have missed with the Panthers and the Falcons and the Saints especially. If the Buccaneers can make good decisions in the front office and draft well, I mean, who's to say Baker Mayfield's not the long-term answer at center?
I think Baker Mayfield deserves a shot with the Buccaneers after this season to at least get a 2-year deal, similar to what Geno Smith just got with the Seahawks. Before the season, John, I made this tweet, and I want to present it to everybody. I want to share my screen and show everybody to just to let them know that I mean business. I mean business, Mr. John. This tweet, what does it say? It says, I feel good about Baker Mayfield this season. Buccaneers still have a good team, and I love the Dave Canales hire. Canales played a major part in Geno Smith's ascension last season, and his press conferences give me confidence in his open-mindedness as a DC.
OC.
As an OC. Sorry, John. Thank you for correcting me. I mean, spot on. 80% of what I say, spot on. I would say it's pretty spot on, John. And Baker Mayfield's success in Tampa Bay, like you mentioned, or lack of running game. This was a team that last year, Tom Brady with Brian Leftwich's OC, they were not able to have efficient offensive results. Now with Baker Mayfield, it's been up and down, but you see some of the highs. And I think if you improve the offensive line somewhat and the running game is more efficient, you can count on Baker Mayfield to have a solid floor. A major knock on him in Cleveland was he doesn't get his playmakers involved. Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry. Really, Odell Beckham was the major guy, right? But in Tampa Bay, I mean, Mike Evans is about to be 1,000-yard receiver again. Chris Godwin just had the best game of his season last game. Rashad White is getting involved in the passing game. You got some rookies yards too. Yeah, I mean, listen, man. Baker Mayfield, all the narratives around him are starting to get dismissed one by one. And I want to do something because Trevor Lawrence is labeled a top 10 quarterback, generational quarterback prospect. Baker Mayfield before this season was the first overall pick bust. In their first 3 seasons of their career, Trevor Lawrence, 48 games. He's gone 20-28 win-loss record, 63.8% completion percentage, 235 yards per game, 55 touchdowns to 35 interceptions, and an 85.5 passer rating. Some will say Urban Meyer was his head coach's rookie year. That's fair. But I can also say Baker Mayfield, his second season, he had Freddie Kitchens as a head coach. And in his rookie season, it was Hugh Jackson and Greg Williams. Baker Mayfield first 3 years, 45 games. Baker Mayfield first 3 years, 46 games, 45 starts, 23-22 win-loss record, 61.9% completion percentage, 241.6 yards per game, 75 touchdowns to 43 interceptions, and an 89.1 passer rating. I'm not saying this to knock Trevor Lawrence. I'm saying this to simply say we gave Baker Mayfield a bad rap because in his 4th year in Cleveland, when he was playing through 3 injuries, people wanted to rule him out completely like he wasn't a serviceable quarterback and they wanted to throw him away. He went to Carolina, which was an awful situation. He couldn't get on track. But then when he got released and signed with the Rams and had a Thursday night football game that was memorable, right, not even practicing with the team, just getting with the team and leading the game-winning drive. Off of that, he got this starting quarterback job in Tampa Bay. He bet on himself. And this year, he's having a fantastic season for the Buccaneers. They could make the playoffs. And I'm saying this to say, one guy's labeled as a top 10 quarterback. One guy was written off as a complete bust, and it wasn't fair to Baker.
Well said.
Baker Mayfield, baby.
Yeah, I wrote him off too because I thought he went to one of the worst situations in the NFL, and he was setting himself up to legitimately ruin his career. Offensive line, coaching, running game are all abysmal, it felt like. And so, as you've highlighted, he has made do with what he's had. They're 21st right now in points per game. If they had a somewhat average rushing attack, like 16th in the NFL opposed to 31st, 32nd, that's one of the better offenses in points per game. And they've got a top 15 defense. They're kind of like Seattle, which in that aspect where they can win a playoff game if they can put together a couple more pieces. And not too long ago, they were a juggernaut in this NFC. They were the best team in the NFL. So, I mean, we'll see.
We will see. Any last things you want to say, John, before we wrap this show up?
Not quite. I know I'm wearing a Steelers beanie, so I'm going to get some crap for it, and I should. Quite frankly, I should spin this thing around.
Mike Tomlin, do you want him to be the head coach or not?
I would like for the Steelers to part ways and get him to a team like Washington.
Wow.
Best for both sides to me. And it's been a very sweaty time, so to speak, watching us lose to all of the teams we have over the last month because it felt like Pittsburgh has completely given up on their season. Their offensive line and defense have crumbled due to injuries, and quite frankly, Pittsburgh needs a reset. They need a top 10 pick, and they need to have one more very big-time draft to be a sustainable playoff team. And I don't think right now that's a surefire thing. We have to see if they can get a good amount of assets for a top 10 coach.
Now, before we get out of here, just want to remind the audience that we are partnered with PrizePicks. It helps out the podcast a lot. If you download PrizePicks and use code PAS, you can make picks You can make the picks on a player going more or less what their projected points, assists, rebounds are on PrizePicks. You can enter, and they're available in more than 20 states. It's very easy to play. It's very easy to sign up, and they have some great promotions going on right now. You got a KD free square that lasts up to Christmas, so you have time to enter. It's a free square. I think right now the pick is a half a point. I mean, we know Katie's going to get a half a point, so that's easy. And then we have 12 days of pick miss, and each day PrizePicks is going to give you a generous gift. Today for me, it was for every field goal that a kicker on the Seahawks or Eagles makes, I get $5. That was very cool. And they have a new feature, which is Demons and Goblins. The Demons it raises up the stakes of your entries, and Goblins, it kind of lowers it a little bit. You kind of play on a safer route. But yes, download PrizePicks, use code PAS, and that's going to do it for John and I tonight. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.